Hi, I'm Adam Porter, and this is my top 100 board game mechanisms of all time. We started a couple of days ago with numbers 100 to 91, and I explained that I'm a board game designer. And so I really get involved with looking at how games work, trying to get behind the scenes and think about, right, how do we piece these things together and what different clever combinations of mechanisms can create new experiences. So hopefully this list is going to give you a whole load of ideas about different experiences that you could have if you picked up one of these games, or if you're a designer, different types of mechanisms you could bring together in your own designs to create the sort of worlds that you want for your players, or the sort of emotions that you want your players to experience. Number 90 is the follow mechanism, as it's become known. I didn't always know it as the follow mechanism. This is something that seems to have come up over the last couple of years, this term, but what we're talking about here is that mechanism I think first employed in Puerto Rico, although I'm not particularly familiar with the game Puerto Rico. I have played it, but I play San Juan more frequently, the card game version. So this is the mechanism where if I choose to do a certain action in the game, so let's say I choose to build, then everybody else can build at the same time. Okay, so I choose the action, but everybody benefits from it. However, I get an extra kickback. I get a better version of that build action. So it's really satisfying because everybody's involved in every turn of the game. You know, everyone's involved in every decision anybody makes. And there's lots of sort of hoping that, okay, I'm not going to take that action. Maybe there's two things you want to do. So I'll do this, but I'm hoping another player might do this on another turn. And yes, I'll get a slightly lower version of it, but I'm still benefiting. Or maybe you're hoping they won't do it so that you get the benefit, the extra special version of that action. Another great game that uses this is the often overlooked game Skylands that came out a couple of years ago from Queen Games. This uses the follow mechanism in a tile laying game. Number 89 is resource conversion. So this is where I have a set of resources. In board games, I suppose that's often wood and clay and reed and stone, or it might be sheep and cows and grain. And as you can see here, I'm talking about Agricola, aren't I? And we can convert those resources from one thing to another. The wood becomes fences or becomes stables, and that houses the animals, and the stone can be used alongside the reed to upgrade your house, to turn the rooms from wooden rooms into clay rooms or into stone rooms, and so on. And so resource conversion can be really satisfying. Now there are some games which have made the entire game resource conversion. So games like Splendor and Century Spice Road, that's a really sort of a classic example of that. And recently the game Little Factory did this as well, where you're taking resources on cards and then you're swapping them for other better cards, and then eventually you can swap those better cards for even better cards which are going to score you points. Sometimes I find this mechanism a little bit dry. It doesn't feel like there's too much going on. We're just cranking an engine and just waiting until I'm able to actually pull in the genuinely rewarding stuff, you know, those really high points cards. But I've got to go through a whole lot of grinding before I get there. But I do enjoy it in a thematic sort of Euro game like Agricola, where I'm running my farm and I'm really thinking about what I'm doing and everything makes sense. A lot of Euro games have this sort of stuff in them. That's why it's further down the list, is because sometimes I don't like the grind of it. I want the rewards more quickly. I don't want to have to wait and wait and wait to get those big rewards. Number 88 is a nice simple one, which is a replenishing market. So if you think about Ticket to Ride, in Ticket to Ride we've got some cards laid out, and on my turn I can take cards from that central display, or I can take them blind from the top of the deck, and then immediately some more cards are laid out for the next turn. Okay, a nice simple mechanism, but it's really, really versatile. It's used in lots and lots of different games, and it's just satisfying. It's just nice. A nice recent twist on it was in Enchanted Plumes, which I've talked about a little bit on the channel over the last couple of months. But Enchanted Plumes has a slight twist in that on your turn you can either draw cards from the top of the deck, or, in which case you're getting them blind, or you can take them from that central display, but in that case you've got to swap them with cards from your hand. And so your hand size is constantly altering, because if I swap them, well, I'm not actually getting anything new. My hand is not increasing in size. And so sometimes I can swap with the middle, sometimes I'm going to want to be taking them blind to try and build up my supply of cards a little bit more. And I found that a really satisfying twist on this replenishing market style game. Number 87 is contract fulfillment. And what I mean by this is those games that have like an objective. I've got a card in my hand which says, I've got to fulfill this. I've got to eat certain colours of bamboo with my panda in order to achieve this objective, or grow different levels of bamboo in that garden. Or I've got to connect this city to this city in Ticket to Ride in order to score points. So having something in hand, probably several things that you can work towards. Even better if it's several different objectives, because then, okay, this one's not working out so well for me, I'll put that on the wayside and I'll work on a different objective, and maybe I'll come back to that one later. It's really nice to have a purpose, to know what you're aiming for, and to be aiming for something that's different to the other players, and not to quite know what they're going for. So these sort of secret hidden objectives, you see them in games like Wingspan as well. They're really satisfying because they give you a sense of purpose. Number 86 is income. So I do like an economic game. I like a game where I'm spending stuff, I'm investing, and I'm getting the rewards back. Okay, but income is great when each round or each turn I'm generating stuff, or every now and then in the game I get stuff, and it's the amount that I get, the income that I get, is based on my previous actions. So this might be in patchwork, where I've laid down a whole bunch of different patches on my quilt, but every now and then I'm going to get a whole lot of buttons back, and those buttons are going to be really useful for me in buying even better and better patches as we move forward. Or in Tigris and Euphrates, where I've laid out certain tiles, and those tiles are going to keep generating me cubes, and these cubes are going to be the things that win me the game. But the more tiles I have down, the more cubes I'm going to be getting. So each turn, I get more and more. If I can lay down a temple, then they're really going to churn out cubes and give me loads and loads of stuff. Fantastic. Isle of Skye, every time I put down a tile with, I think it's a barrel, then I'm going to get some coins at the start of each turn. And maybe I've got more of those than anybody else because they're focusing on some other aspect of their map. So I really like games where I get income throughout the game, even better if that income is determined by my previous actions in the game. And number 85 is almost the opposite. This is what I'm calling feed your workers. Because of Agricola. In Agricola, at the end, at every harvest, I've got to feed my workers. So regardless of what I'm getting on with in terms of building my farm, I better be gathering food, because every now and then I'm going to have to pay my workers with that food. And it could be something totally different. It could be a penalty of some sort. Stefan Feld games often have this, where every now and then we have to pay off to avoid an infestation of rats or a fire. Or a plague, or whatever. It could be all sorts of different things, an attack by different enemies. And so you've got to, while you're planning all your other stuff, you're doing all your nice building stuff, you've also got to have this in the back of your mind that you're going to have to fight off that peril at the end of each round. Some players really don't enjoy this sort of mechanism, I know that. I like it because I like the stress and the tension that it creates, okay? I do like that feeling of, I can't quite do everything that I want to do. I better deal with that, or otherwise I'm going to take a penalty. Or maybe I push my luck and just accept the penalty and just think, well, do you know what? I'm not going to worry about that fire. Let it burn. I'm going to deal with this. I'll deal with that later. Okay, I think that's quite a satisfying sort of push your luck moment that can come from these games. Number 84 is, I suppose it's kind of specific to Power Grid, this one, although I've looked it up and I've found out that it is known as stat turn order, okay? What we're talking about here is that thing in Power Grid where the player order, it doesn't just go clockwise around the table, it changes, and it changes depending on what we've done during the game. So in Power Grid specifically, if you don't want to be ahead, okay, because if you're ahead on points, you're going to be playing later in the turn. The turn order is kind of reversed. If you want to play first, you better be behind on points, and it's really valuable going first. So there's a lot of biding your time. At different phases of the game, that works differently. So in some phases of the game, the player who's ahead will go first, and in other phases of the game, the player who's behind will go first, depending on whether it's a benefit to go first or not. And I really like that dynamic player order. It can be a little tricky to keep track of because, of course, we're also accustomed to that idea of turn order just goes clockwise around the table. But as a mechanism, it does work really, really well. As a sort of theoretical mechanism, yeah, it's a really good balancing system. So I really like that. It's one way of preventing runaway leaders is to say, well, if you're out in front, you're playing last. Number 83 is dice drafting. And we'll be coming back to dice rolling quite a lot throughout this list, I expect. But I do quite like those mechanisms where you roll a bunch of dice and then you each select a different result. This kind of mitigates the randomness of dice. People think of dice rolling as being extremely random, but if we roll all the dice into one central pool and then take turns to pick the dice results which most benefit us, then that can be a really satisfying mechanism. So dice drafting, a great example is the game Grand Austria Hotel. That's a big strategic Euro game where we're helping our customers feed them so that they'll stay in our hotel and then putting them into the rooms and so on. But it's all driven by this pool of dice where you select one in order to take a certain action. Pioneer Days uses dice in all sorts of different clever ways. So when I take that dice, I can then use it to power a different type of action on the board. All sorts of different things. For example, dealing with some sort of peril, like we've talked about with the feed your workers mechanism. Or it could be to take some sort of income, or to take a special action card. Okay, so really satisfying dice drafting in Pioneer Days. Number 82 is that two-player mechanism where you're competing over a central row of cards or locations. So usually there's a row of cards in between you, and then we're playing cards to either side of that central row to try and dominate or take ownership of one of the central cards. So this is classically seen in the two-player games Lost Cities, Schottentotten, and Hanamakoji, and my own game that I designed with Rob Fisher, which is Compromat, which uses a kind of blackjack mechanism where we're playing blackjack against each other to take control or take ownership of that central card, which might give us a special power for a future turn, might give us victory points, or work towards some sort of set. And so the final one on this list of 10, 90 to 81, number 81 is a race to solve a puzzle. Okay, so this features in games like Dimension. It features in my own game, Quazzle, which again I designed with Rob Fisher, where we've got a puzzle is laid out by laying out a series of cards, and then we race to fit those different dice into that different orientation shown on the puzzle. It might be something like the Genius Square, where we're putting polyomino blocks into a grid and trying to complete that before the other player. Or it might be something a little bit more complex, like Ricochet Robots, where we're trying to calculate the lowest number of possible moves in order to get one robot from one location to another location, bouncing off the walls as they go. And you're trying to do it in fewer moves than the other players. I find this really satisfying. Sitting down doing a puzzle on my own is great, but if you can turn it into a competitive activity, that adds a lot of fun to it too. So as we did in the previous video, we're going to now talk about one mechanism that I don't particularly enjoy in games. And thankfully, it's one that doesn't come up all that often, although I see it fairly frequently in prototype games when I'm playing at playtest groups and things like this. So this is victory points as currency. So it's where you've built up a pile of victory points, and then you can spend some of those victory points to power up special abilities. And what this tends to do is create a runaway leader, because the person who's ahead on points can afford to lose some of those points. They get their special ability and then they pull even further ahead in terms of the victory points. So that kind of double use of victory points is really frustrating, and in fact it's better if it goes the other way. I prefer it if the players who are behind in the victory points get the special ability so that they can pull back some of that distance. So that is the mechanism that I don't enjoy for this video. So that's my numbers 90 to 81. Please come back and join me in the next couple of days when I'll be putting up the next list, numbers 80 to 70. I hope you've seen some games there that take your fancy, or some mechanisms that you haven't fully explored yet that you might want to look into. So I'll see you in a couple of days. In the meantime, leave some comments, let me know what you think of these mechanisms. Do you enjoy that sort of game? Some examples of the genres that I've talked about that maybe I haven't mentioned that maybe I might enjoy, so I'd like to hear those, things that I could look up myself. And I'll see you in a couple of days.